Acceptability criterion fallacies. So these are fallacies that basically breach the reasonableness of an argument. The acceptability criteria is basically that a reasonable, intelligent, educated person would accept the validity of your arguments. So these fallacies include fallacies of linguistic confusion and unwarranted assumption fallacy. First, equivocation or doublespeak. For example, I agree with climate change. This example comes from Senator Jackie Lambie, who said, I believe climate change. It's always been getting a lot hotter and it's always been getting a lot colder. So this is a fallacy because shifting a definition of a key term such as global warming allows you a lot more flexibility and freedom to push your own agenda in an argument, and therefore it's fallacious. 2 is ambiguity or semantic ambiguity. For example, we all know humans came from apes and our ancestors came from Africa. So this is a subtle distinction, but the key phrase here is came from. So the two forms of the word of the phrase came from represent very different things in terms of genealogy and also in terms of place of origin. And this is a fallacy because it's purposely obfuscating what's trying to be communicated, which is two different things, genealogy and origin, which is just purposely being ambiguous in your speech. 3 is misleading accent, accentus, or prosody. For example, you said in an earlier speech that you believe in controlling migration. By this, do we understand that you mean that we should accept no more refugees? This is a fallacy just because it's not entirely clear what you're suggesting, but the way you've sort of underlined and stressed in an ironic way a key phrase is fallacious. 4 is illicit contrast or arguing in a circle. So this is actually quite a tricky one, so I can't give you an actually clear example, but it's where the audience member adds something that's not actually presented in the argument, but that they know supports what they think or what the person is presenting. So they've actually added something additional to what was there than what was there in the speech. And this is something to be avoided if you're judging a debate. And this is a fallacy, of course, because the thing that you've added was never actually in the debate and you're giving the person who spoke credit for that. 5 is argument by innuendo. For example, it's great to have you here so that we can hear from the fringe dwellers and the conspiracy theorists. So this is a fallacy, of course, because it doesn't actually add anything to the argument, but it sort of just subtly attacks the people who are presenting their own. 6 is misuse of a vague expression. For example, you said to us earlier, words can be misinterpreted. Are we by that to understand that you don't value education? And the fallacy is, of course, that the English language can be complicated and misleading at times, and you taking advantage of that fact is fallacious. 7 is distinction without difference. For example, rather than supporting gay marriage, would you support same-sex gender equality? This is a fallacy because the two arguments are actually not different, they're just different linguistically. And so that's an irrelevant argument and also fallacious. 8 is fallacy of the continuum, which is also known as fallacy of the beard or the bald man fallacy. For example, sure, democracy is good, but oligarchy is only a slightly different version of democracy. So really, what's the difference? And this is a fallacy, of course, because in a debate it's really important that you hold to the definitions, and very small differences can become very large when debated at length. 9 is fallacy of composition. For example, I recently learned of a One Nation member who believes that the Port Arthur massacre was a fake, therefore everyone in One Nation is an it. This is a fallacy because basically not all members of a group are the same, and to do so is just a lazy generalization. 10 is a fallacy of division. For example, member number 1 of the One Nation Party believes in aliens, so member 2 must also. And this is a fallacy very similar to the previous one because this is just stupid. 11 is false alternatives, also called a false dichotomy. For example, your options, members of the audience, is either accept this motion or we go back to the drawing board with nothing. This is a fallacy because, of course, in life there are never only two options and there's always a multitude of grey and complexities for us to explore. 12 is the is-ought fallacy. For example, we must maintain the status quo and keep things exactly as they are so we can all be safe. And this is a fallacy, of course, just because something is doesn't mean it ought to be the case. If we look back through any stage of history, we should be able to see a pretty clear progression from bad to better, and therefore progress is better than simply saying something is how it is now, therefore it ought to be always that way. 13 is wishful thinking. For example, I believe that if we all put positive thoughts and we put our little wishing board full, then everyone who needs to vote for our party will vote for them. This is a fallacy, of course, because wishful thinking is just another form of hypothetical and therefore isn't a real argument at all. 14 is misuse of a principle. For example, you say that all murderers should be put to death, but what about the case of Flora Jenkins? And this is a fallacy because in regards to most things, there will always be exceptions, and to pretend that there's not, it just seems a bit silly. 15 is fallacy of the mean. For example, extremists are those people that go wildly to the left or to the right. What we need to be doing is sort of heading for the middle, so we're not too left and not too right, and that's the best course of action. And this is a fallacy because simply choosing an arbitrary point, in this case the middle, is not necessarily the correct answer to any argument, but it's just a lazy shortcut. 16 is faulty analogy. For example, marriage is like eating the same meal for dinner every night for the rest of your life. It's boring. So we should all support polygamy. And this is a fallacy because the two things you make it an analogy between are of course not really that closely related, and that's why it's an analogy.